Hi everyone, I'm Tommy. At the beginning of the video, let's first think about the world in 400 years ago. It was a world lit only by fires. There was no factories, airplanes, or electric lights or light bulbs. However, in the ensuing 150 years, the world was transformed beyond recognition. Between 1750 and 1900, humanity experienced the most dramatic reshaping of life since the agricultural revolution. Factories replaced fields, steam-powered empires, revolutions toppled kings, and entire continents reimagined their identities. This is Unit 6 in AP World History, the engine room of the modern era. We'll explore four monumental themes. The first is the rise of industrial power and global economic realignment. The second is political revolutions, fueled by Enlightenment thought. Third is the survival or collapse of old empires. And the last one is the forging of new nations across the Americas. As we move through chapters 21 to 24, think not just about events, but about causes, connections, and consequences. Let's begin. Our journey starts in Britain, in smoky cities and cluttered workshops. It starts with one of the biggest what-ifs in history. What if the world had never industrialized? Luckily or unluckily, depends on your view, it did. And it started with textiles. Innovations like the spinning jenny, flying shuttle, and power loom revolutionized fabric production. What once took hours by hand now took minutes by machine. Then came James Watt's steam engine, a machine that didn't just power factories but trains, steamships, and dreams of global domination. But why it was Britain? Here's the reason for that. The first is coal and iron deposits at home. Second is a global empire supplying raw materials and markets. Third, a banking system willing to invest. Fourth, political stability and property rights. Fifth, in the spirit of invention, inspired by Enlightenment values. The results were revolutionary. So first is the sword urbanization. Cities like Manchester became industrial giants. Second, women and children became factory workers, often under horrific conditions. Third, new class divisions formed between owners and wage laborers. Meanwhile, the revolution spread. First, in Western Europe, especially Belgium and Germany, industrialized rapidly. Second, in the United States, by 1830s, canals and railroads connected cities and powered internal growth. Third, in Japan, throughout the Meiji Restoration, industrialized with astonishing speed. But what about the rest of the world? Countries like India, once home to rich textile traditions, were turned into raw material suppliers. Egyptian cotton fed English looms. Latin America's silver and rubber flowed to factories in Europe. Industrialization wasn't just economic, it was geopolitical. It shifted power to nations that could build, ship, and consume at scale. The world had entered the age of machines, and there was no going back. As we move into chapter 22, we shift from machines to minds and from coal to consciousness. The Atlantic revolutions were not isolated rebellions, they were a chain reaction ignited by the Enlightenment. The idea was simple but dangerous. Power should serve the people. Let's walk through the revolutions. Inspired by thinkers like John Locke, the colonists rebelled over taxes, representation, and autonomy. In 1776, they declared independence. By 1789, the United States Constitution enshrined Enlightenment values: liberty, checks and balances, and government by the people, at least. White male landowners. More radical and explosive, the Third Estate, long oppressed by the nobles and clergy, demanded justice. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen promised liberty, but the Reign of Terror brought chaos and mass executions. Napoleon eventually rose, spreading revolutionary ideals and conquests across Europe. This was the most radical revolution and one of the least discussed. Toussaint Louverture, a former slave, led a successful uprising in Saint-Domingue. By 1804, Haiti was the first black-led republic and the first country born of a successful slave revolt. It shattered the myth of colonial invincibility. Figures like Simon Bolivar and Jose de San Martin led independence movements against Spain and Portugal. These revolutions were fueled by both Enlightenment ideas and resentment of colonial exploitation. But despite political independence, social hierarchies remained. Many of these nations struggled with instability and colonial rule. Why does this matter? These revolutions gave birth to modern concepts of nationalism, constitutional government, human rights. But they also raised difficult questions. Who counts as a citizen? What does liberty look like in a slave-owning society? How do you unite a diverse population after colonial rule? The answers varied, but the legacy was shared. The idea that people could change governments, not by accident, but by design. In Chapter 23, while revolutions redefined the West, the Eurasian Empire struggled to hold on to the past and navigate the future. Once a powerhouse, by the 1800s, the Ottomans were nicknamed the sick men of Europe. They launched the Tanzimat reforms, efforts to modernize schools, locals, and the military. But nationalism tore at the edges. Greeks, Serbs, and Arabs sought autonomy. Corruption and foreign debts weakened the core. Russia remained feudal deep into the 19th century. Serfs were legally tied to landowners until 1861. Industrialization came through the state, railroads, mining, and military upgrades, but reforms were often superficial and repression remained the Tsar's tool of choice. China's decline was dramatic. The Opium Wars. From 1839 to 1842 and from 1856 to 1860, forced open ports and crippled sovereignty. The Taiping Rebellion from 1850 to 1864, a mix of Christianity, anti-Manchu sentiments, and millionairism, caused an estimated 20 to 30 million deaths. Reform attempts like the self-strengthening movement modernized some weapons and industries, but failed to change governance or prevent European encroachment. These weakening empires wasn't just victims. They were caught in the gears of Western imperialism. Industrialized nations needed markets, resources, and prestige, so they turned to Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, not just to trade, but to conquer, divide, and dominate. The imbalance between industrial powers and traditional empires was now global. At Chapter 24, it discusses what happened next after revolution. The Americas faced the hard task of building nations from scratch. By 1865, the United States had abolished slavery and defeated the Confederacy, but the scars of racial injustice and economic inequality lingered. Westward expansion displaced native people and turned the United States into a continental empire. Industrialization turned cities like Chicago into economic powerhouses. Mexico's post-independence path was rocky. The Mexican-American War, from 1846 to 1848, led to the loss of half of its territory. The Liberal Reform War, French intervention under Napoleon III, and the execution of Emperor Maximilian I all reflected the country's struggle to find balance. Ultimately, Benito Juárez's liberal reforms prevailed. Brazil gained independence without violence, remaining a monarchy until 1889. Yet, it was also the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery in 1888. Its economy thrived on coffee exports and European immigration, especially from Italy and Germany. Argentina and Chile invested in infrastructure, like railroads, ports, and telegraphs, immigration helped build cities like Buenos Aires, while landowners like Caudillos maintained political control. Economic growth was strong, but wealth inequality persisted. In conclusion, Unit 6 is about the birth of the modern world, and it wasn't peaceful. The Industrial Revolution made goods cheaper, but created new inequalities. Revolutions spread democracy, but often left legacies of exclusion. Empires tried to reform, but find themselves dismembered. New nations emerged full of hope, yet haunted by old hierarchies. This era redefined what it meant to work, who had power, how nations interacted, and most of all, it showed that change is both inevitable and contested. Finally, let's not spend some time focusing not just on what happened in Unit 6, but how to study it, understand it, and master it. You have seen the big stories, revolutions, railroads, rebellions, but how do you make sense of it all? Let's break it down with 5 core strategies, and I will offer examples, frameworks, and questions for each one. First tip is to think thematically, not chronologically. The AP World History exam is not a timeline quiz. It's about patterns and themes. Unit 6 offers rich themes that show up over and over. First, industrialization. Who industrialized? Who didn't? Why? Then political revolution versus reform. When did people uprise? When did governments adapt instead? Third, imperialism. Who conquered whom? What were the consequences? And then nationalism. How did new identities reshape old empires? And then the labor systems and migration. Who moved? Why? What did they experience? So try grouping content by these themes in your notes or review sessions. For example, compare British industrial workers with enslaved sugar workers in Haiti. Contrast Ottoman reforms with Meiji modernization in Japan. The test rewards students who can show they understand global patterns, not just isolated events. Tip number 2, to master the art of comparison and causation. So let's say the DBQ asks you to compare responses to industrialization. You need more than facts. You need cause-effect logic. Use prompts like, while both blank and blank attempted to modernize, only blank succeeded due to blank. Or, despite similar challenges, blank responded with revolution, while blank pursued reform. For example, compare Japan, like the Meiji era, and China, like the Qing dynasty, in response to Western pressure. Or compare Haitian Revolution to American Revolution. What made one anti-slavery and the other not? Also think in terms of causation. Why did the Industrial Revolution start in Britain? What caused revolutions in Latin America? What led to the failure of Qing reforms? These questions train you to analyze, not just memorize. The third tip is to use specific case studies effectively. Of course, you don't need to know everything, because there are so many things happening in history. But you have to know something very well and in particular. These are your go-to examples that you can use to answer a wide range of questions. Here are some powerful case studies. First is Britain and industrialization. It is great for economic, technological, and imperial themes. And Haiti topic covers revolution, race, colonialism, and Enlightenment ideals. Ottoman Tanzimat reforms is a topic which explains a key reform story with mixed outcomes. And Meiji Japan is one of the best examples of successful modernization. Mexico under Juarez and Diaz shows liberal reform versus authoritarian modernization. And Taiping Rebellion explain a massive impact, religious motivated, and internal crisis meets imperialism. So you can have 1 to 2 solid examples for each theme you might be asked about. Practice weaving them into sample DBQs or SAQs. Tip number 4 is to think like a historian. Contextualize and evaluate strong AP essays use what's called contextualization. Place your argument within a broader historical setting. For example, if you are writing about Haitian Revolution, connect it to the broader Atlantic revolutions. Writing about Meiji reforms, place it in the context of Western imperialism threatening Asia. Also practice evaluating effectiveness. Don't just describe reforms or movements, judge whether they worked, and explain why or why not. For example, the self-strengthening movement in China aimed to modernize without disrupting Confucian ideals, but its failure stemmed from internal corruption, resistance from elites, and a lack of true systematic change. Use phrases like, although intended to, or ultimately ineffective due to, or successfully addressed X, but failed to consider Y. And tip number 5 is to memorize with maps, charts, and mnemonics. Unit 6 is global. Use maps to visualize trade networks, imperial conquests, migration routes, or revolution hotspots. So it is necessary to use comparison charts or use mnemonics. So like for cost of industrialization, you can use geography, resources, innovation, networks like trade and demand. For document analysis, you can use speaker, occasion, audience, host, and subjects. So memory tricks don't replace understanding, but they help you recall under pressure. So here are some discussion questions you can ask yourself or others. First, how did industrialization create both opportunity and exploitation? Second, what made the Haitian Revolution unique compared to others? Third, why did some empires reform while others resisted change? Fourth, what role did nationalism play in both unifying and dividing societies? And fifth, how did gender roles change or not change during this period? So these questions will spark reflection and strengthen your analytical skills. And final reflection. So why does the unit 6 still matters? Of course, every unit matters. But for unit 6, it explains why the global economy is so connected today, why inequality between nations still exists, why revolutions form are still relevant in the 21st century, why modernization is complex. It can elaborate or oppress, depending on context. So it will help us ask smarter questions about the world we are living in. Who benefits from innovation? Who is left behind? How do ideas like liberty, equality, progress spread or get distorted? And that's what makes this unit so powerful.